All right, get ready to dive deep. Today, we're tackling Conway's Law.
Oh, yeah, it's a fascinating one.
You bet.
And you sent over some super interesting stuff about it.
Yeah, really delving into this link
Yeah.
between, like, team structures and the software they end up creating.
It's crazy how much it can really make you rethink, how companies work. It's
Absolutely.
almost like you're saying their org chart is like the blueprint for their tech.
Yeah.
We're talking about more than just the code itself.
Right.
We're going to really explore
Yeah.
how team dynamics and communication literally shape the design of
Yeah.
the systems they create.
Okay, so
That's pretty wild.
I think for anyone listening who might need just like a quick refresher,
Yeah.
let's actually break down Conway's Law.
Sure.
It was formulated way back in 1967
Mhm.
by Melvin Conway,
That's right.
and essentially it states that
Yeah.
the structure of a system, any system,
Yeah.
will reflect the communication structure
Uh-huh.
of the organization that designed it.
Right.
But what does that really mean?
Okay, so picture this.
Okay.
You have a company, right?
Mhm.
And they've got these very siloed teams. Okay.
Yeah.
So each department is kind of doing its own thing. Conway's Law would say
Yeah.
that the software they produce
Mhm.
is probably going to be pretty fragmented too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, different parts just feeling kind of disconnected,
Yeah.
almost like a Frankenstein's monster of code,
That's a pretty vivid image.
Yeah.
So are you saying then that if you want to build software that is elegant, integrated,
Yeah.
you need to start with that organizational structure
Absolutely.
that fosters that collaboration and communication?
100%. Yeah. And the implications go way beyond
Yeah.
just how the code looks.
Mhm.
Think about flexibility and adaptability.
Mm.
If a company needs to quickly change its software
Yeah.
to respond to new demands,
Yeah.
having a team that is really tight-knit and communicates well, that's going to be super crucial.
So, now, you mentioned that Conway's Law has been around since 1967.
Right.
But isn't that kind of ancient history in the tech world?
Yeah.
Is it really still relevant today?
I think it's even more relevant now
Wow.
with all the rise of Agile and
Yeah.
DevOps methodologies,
Mhm.
because those approaches, they emphasize cross-functional teams, rapid iteration, and constant communication.
Mhm.
And all those principles just aligned perfectly with Conway's Law.
Okay, so are you saying that companies that are successfully implementing Agile and these things are kind of proving
Yeah, I think so.
Conway's Law?
I think they are proving it in action.
Okay.
Look at microservices architecture, for example. This approach is all about breaking down these big, complex systems into these smaller, independent services that can be developed and deployed by these autonomous teams.
Yeah.
And guess what? The companies that are really excelling with microservices,
Okay.
they often have these organizational structures
Yeah.
that mirror this modular approach. They've got these small, self-contained teams
Right.
focused on specific services,
Right.
and it allows them to be way more agile and responsive.
Okay, so if a company, let's say, wants to adopt this microservices approach, but they're still kind of stuck in that traditional, very hierarchical structure,
Yeah.
are they setting themselves up for failure?
I think it's a very real risk. If you're trying to impose this modular architecture onto a rigid top-down organization,
Yeah.
it can lead to all sorts of problems, communication breakdowns, slow decision-making,
Yeah.
and ultimately a system that just doesn't really work as intended.
This is making me think about, the early days of Unix, which we talked about a little bit in the prep material.
Yeah.
And, it was known for being this simple, elegant design,
It really was.
which was such a stark contrast
Right.
to the other, clunky operating systems of the time.
Yeah.
And the team behind Unix was, famously small and collaborative.
Yeah.
Could that be an example of Conway's Law, early on in action?
Absolutely.
No,
It's a classic case study, you know?
Wow.
That small, tight-knit structure of the Unix team allowed them to create a system that reflected their own, like, communication patterns. It was clean, efficient, and, like, beautifully integrated.
Yeah.
And that leads us to a really fascinating question.
Hold on. Let's unpack that.
Okay.
Part 2.
All right.
I'm already intrigued to see where this goes.
This is going to be good.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be back.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Last time we were talking about the Unix team.
Right.
And how their collaborative structure really led to, like, this super elegant system.
Yeah, it makes you think about, how much those communication patterns actually get kind of embedded in the final product.
Yeah.
It really does. I wonder if are there companies today that you've seen that have, like, intentionally leveraged Conway's law to their advantage?
Oh, absolutely. One of the most, like, striking examples I can think of is Amazon.
Okay.
Back in, like, the early 2000s, they were really struggling with their website. It was this, like, monolithic structure. Everything was bundled together, and it was just becoming a huge bottleneck.
So they were facing those classic problems of that monolithic system, like slow, difficult to update.
Yeah, a nightmare to maintain.
Yeah.
And this is where, like, Conway's law comes into play.
Okay.
Jeff Bezos, he recognized that their structure had these limitations, and he issued this, like, company-wide mandate. Wow. He's like, all teams from now on, you have to build your systems with APIs.
Okay. Now, I know API stands for, Application Programming Interface.
Right.
But for those who might not be familiar, can you just explain quickly why was that such a game changer?
Yeah. So think of an API like as a universal translator for software.
Okay.
It basically allows different applications to talk to each other, exchange data, and work together, like, seamlessly.
Gotcha.
And by mandating that everybody uses APIs, Bezos essentially forced teams to design their systems in this, like, modular way. Like, each team was responsible for building this discrete component that could interact with others through the APIs.
So he was reshaping the company's communication structure through, like, this technical requirement.
Exactly. Wow. And the results were, like, seriously transformative. This shift toward modularity driven by that change in communication patterns.
Yeah.
It paved the way for the creation of, like, AWS, Amazon Web Services.
That's huge.
Yeah.
AWS is, like, the giant in cloud computing today.
Totally.
So are you saying that without this, like, conscious application of Conway's law, AWS might not even exist?
I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but the timing is definitely suggestive.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't just about breaking down a technical system. It was about empowering these smaller, more autonomous teams to, like, innovate and operate independently. And this, like, decentralized approach where teams could develop and deploy their services so quickly and efficiently. It was a radical departure from the, like, traditional model.
That's fascinating. So it sounds like this is, like, a perfect example of how, understanding Conway's law can give companies a real competitive edge.
Definitely.
But I'm curious about, like, the flip side. What about the cases where companies maybe are trying to change their systems without considering that human element? What happens then?
That's where things can get a little tricky. Like, you can't just impose a new system design, right, without thinking about the people and how they're used to communicating. So, for example, let's say a company is trying to, like, transition from, like, this waterfall development model to something more agile.
Okay.
So they restructure their teams, They make them smaller. They make them cross-functional, but
like, if that company culture is still very hierarchical and top down, those teams are going to struggle to really embrace that true, like, agile way of working.
Totally. You could end up with a situation where, like, despite those structural changes, decision-making is still really slow. Communication is all stifled by, like, bureaucracy, and then all those benefits of, like, agility are lost.
So awareness of Conway's law is crucial.
For sure.
But it's not enough to just understand it.
Yeah.
You've got to be, like, actively shaping those communication structures to align with the goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where we have to be careful about, like, what I call Conway's law in reverse.
Conway's law in reverse?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's when people try to, like, force a specific system design, believing that it's going to force the organization to adapt. Like, if we build it this way, they'll have to change. But organizations and their cultures are complex, right?
Yeah.
You can't just like dictate a new structure and expect everyone to just fall in line.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you're more likely to get resistance and frustration than like a smooth transition.
Yeah. Trying to force a change like that just seems like it would backfire.
Totally. You could end up with a system that, like, even though it have all these technical merits, ultimately gets rejected or misused because it just doesn't align with how people actually work and communicate.
So the takeaway here is that Conway's Law is this really powerful tool for understanding how systems and organizations are intertwined, but it's not like a deterministic law that dictates a specific outcome, right?
It's more about like understanding the interplay between those communication patterns and the systems they create. Recognizing that like technology and human behavior, those two are inseparable. And ignoring that can lead to some like unintended consequences.
Yeah, this has been a really eye-opening conversation.
Good.
But I have to say, so far, we've mainly focused on those positive applications of Conway's Law.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that there is like a dark side to this.
Right.
I'm really curious to hear more about that.
Well, stay tuned for part 3, where we'll delve into some of those potential pitfalls and how to like effectively navigate them.
Okay, we're back, and you've really got me thinking about this hidden influence of Conway's Law.
Yeah.
You know, I'm ready to hear about this dark side you mentioned.
Okay.
Like, what are some ways this principle can actually backfire?
Well, you know, we've been talking about how Conway's Law highlights this connection between like organizational structure and system design.
Yeah.
But sometimes that connection can lead to like some unintended consequences, especially when companies try to like ignore the human element.
Yeah, you touched on this before a little bit, but can you give me like a more concrete example?
Okay, so imagine a company that's got like this deeply ingrained hierarchical structure.
Okay.
So lots of layers of management, decision-making, like strictly top-down. Now, let's say they decide, okay, we're going to embrace this more agile approach to software development.
Okay.
They break their teams into smaller cross-functional units.
Right. It sounds good so far.
Right. Sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
If the company's overall culture is still like really steeped in that top-down decision-making, those agile teams, they might constantly hit roadblocks.
Yeah, because they're structured for agility, but the larger organization isn't, right?
Exactly, yeah. You get this disconnect between like the intended structure and how the organization actually functions.
So even if you change the structure on paper, those old ways of communicating can still kind of persist and sabotage the intended outcome.
100%. Yeah.
So I guess this can manifest in a lot of ways.
Totally.
You know, maybe resistance to change from managers who are used to like having that tight control.
Right. And decisions that should be made quickly within the agile team, suddenly like they get bogged down in all these layers of approval.
Right. And I imagine that has a direct impact on the software itself.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're aiming for this modular, flexible system, but it ends up feeling really clunky and rigid.
Totally. And it's all because of those communication bottlenecks.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, basically.
Yeah, exactly. For Conway's Law to really work in your favor, you know, you need that true alignment between the structure, the culture, and those communication patterns.
Okay, so this makes me wonder, do you think some companies might fall into this trap of thinking they can actually use Conway's Law to like force a cultural shift?
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time.
Really?
Yeah, they think if we just like redesign our systems in this more collaborative way, then the organization will just like have to adapt.
Right.
And it's just not that simple, you know?
Right.
Organizations are these complex, living, breathing things. You can't just like dictate a new structure and expect everybody to just fall in line.
It seems like it would just cause more problems than it solves.
Exactly. It's like more likely to create confusion,
right,
frustration, and then ultimately a system that just doesn't achieve its goals.
So I guess the key takeaway here is that you can't ignore those human factors.
Totally.
Like people are creatures of habit, and changing those ingrained communication patterns takes time.
It takes effort. It takes a real conscious shift in mindset.
Okay, so let's say a company really wants to leverage Conway's Law in a way that's actually effective. What are like some practical steps?
I think first and foremost, you got to have open and honest communication.
Okay.
So when you're, planning a new system or
Yeah.
thinking about restructuring,
Yeah.
involve everybody who's going to be impacted.
Gotcha.
Like, don't just dictate the plan from the top, right?
Right.
Like, solicit feedback, understand people's concerns.
Yeah.
Be really transparent about the goals you're trying to achieve.
So it's about like fostering a sense of ownership
Yeah.
and shared purpose
Exactly.
rather than just imposing a solution.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to, experiment a little bit.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all
Yeah.
approach to organizational design. So
Mm.
try different communication structures, see what works best for your team, for your specific context. Embrace that spirit of agility, and
Yeah.
not just in software development,
Right.
but in how you approach organizational change as a whole.
This has been such a great deep dive.
Thanks.
We've covered so much.
We really have, yeah.
From the basic principles of Conway's law
Mm-hmm.
to these real world examples.
Yeah,
We've seen successes, we've seen pitfalls,
for sure.
and really just the takeaway here, that importance of aligning that organizational structure with those communication patterns.
That's so crucial, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a fascinating concept,
It is.
It really highlights that human element in
Mm.
system design.
Mhm.
And we've seen, understanding Conway's law isn't just about building better software.
Right.
It's about building better organizations,
Yeah.
ones that are more collaborative, more adaptable,
Yeah.
and ultimately more successful.
Thank you so much for guiding us through this.
It's been my pleasure.
This was really eye-opening.
Good. I'm glad.
It was. It really was.
Awesome.
So to everyone listening, the next time you face a challenge,
Yeah.
whether it's, technical or organizational,
Mm-hmm.
remember Conway's law.
Think about it. Yeah.
It might just offer a fresh perspective
It might.
and help you find a more creative and human-centered solution.
Absolutely.
I love that. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This was great. And to all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this deep dive on Conway's Law.